Hello again, I am Blunty, and this of course is Space Invaders. Now, Space Invaders is not the subject of today's video, but it is where we must plant our feet in order to splash our face with the waters of the game of today's video. So to begin, one of the world's first true smash hit video games was Space Invaders, a work of true genius, from concept to execution, right down to creating a truly gripping and adrenaline-pumping musical soundtrack with nothing but a few different tones of beeps and boops, the genius of which was to emulate a heartbeat. And as the alien enemies got closer and closer to landing, that heartbeat would speed up, causing an instinctive reaction and urgency and stress in the player. It was a wonderful, genius bit of game design, especially so given the limitations of the day. I mean, sure, by modern standards it looks and sounds laughably primitive, like a sputtering horseless carriage next to a jet fighter, but 37 years later it still holds up as a fun video game. And let me tell you, that is a little bit rare, because I've replayed a lot of games from my youth, and well, frankly, some of them are not as good as I remember them being. Space Invaders is. But if you spent your prepubescent years in the 80s like I did, you may know Space Invaders more like this. This is the home console version, or rather one of practically countless versions, if you count both the flat-out rip-offs and clones and copies and ROM hacks alongside the officially licensed ones, like this on the Atari 2600. This is how I knew it, and this is how, as a very young child, I was introduced to video games. Space Invaders inspired countless other games throughout the years. One of the most remarkable was 1981's Galaga, of course, just a few years after Space Invaders. Galaga basically took what Space Invaders did and polished every facet. It wasn't just yet another Me Too copycat, and there were so many of those. It was its own beast, and it earned its place in video game history. In fact, you can still buy this game to this day. I think it's on the Xbox One store. And again, as a child too young to go to video game arcades, much less reach the joysticks, I knew it best at the time, at home, on my Atari. And following the massive worldwide success of these two games over the next 3 decades and more, every year has continuously seen games that copy, clone, repackage, remake, or merely claim inspiration from these games. You can see the influence of these games right through to today. Hundreds, likely thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands even. Single attack ship versus waves of oncoming alien ships trace directly back to these two games. The latest of which is called Generic Space Shooter, and that is the subject of today's video. I know the path to get here was long, but I kind of wanted to talk about Space Invaders and Galaga because they are, well, games that I grew up playing, and very important games, particularly to games like Generic Space Shooter, who of course draw inspiration directly from them. It popped up in the new releases on Steam yesterday as I was poking about, and at first I took its name to be yet another, well, flat attempt at self-deprecating sarcasm. An obvious attention-getting gimmick, I thought, in a breathlessly desperate attempt to stand out even slightly against the neck-deep flood of half-assed crapware that is the Steam store below the floating foam of the AAA titles and a few brilliant indies. But a click costs nothing, so I clicked, and I looked at the trailer and the screenshots, and then I decided to throw a few bucks at it to give it a go. And what I found was no pathetic rushed-out clone of Galaga or Space Invaders like a gajillion other games just like it. I mean, there's nothing particularly inspired or special about the presentation or gameplay. It has to be said, it is, very literally, a generic space shooter. And even if you strip the space shooter stuff away, it is just another twin-stick shooter stapled together in the Unity game engine. And with or without the splash of spacecraft paint over the top of this one, there's possibly even more simplistic half-assed twin-stick shooters out there than there are Space Invaders clones. But what Generic Space Shooter gets right, it gets very right, and it actually makes it worth it. The near-perfect balance of difficulty ramping as each wave grows just a little more hectic, and as you'd expect, it gradually introduces new enemies with their own patterns and abilities and styles and sizes and defensive capabilities and all that kind of stuff. And just like Galaga, the difficulty curve is almost perfectly ramped up to keep you feeling just a bit badass and also just a bit challenged and overwhelmed, and most importantly, compelled to keep playing. There are various pickups and power-ups with different and brief upgrades to your offensive abilities, and the control is very balanced between being smooth and twitchy. I felt perfectly in control the whole time, and this is one of the most vital things that many clones and games inspired by Galaga and Space Invaders just get wrong. The controls suck, and it makes them nearly unplayable. Here, It's nailed. Meaning, anytime I explode and die, I know it's my fault. I don't feel cheated or frustrated by the game mechanics, which means I don't rage quit from the game feeling like I'm hard done by. Any mistake is my mistake, and the next time I play, I'm gonna do better. That, my friends, is good game design. Is this the most amazing top-down shooter ever? No, not by a long shot. But what it is a very competently effective tribute to the best of what came before it. The name is not a mere attention-getter gimmick. It is honest about the game's intentions. It is generic. It is a space shooter. It is a generic space shooter like so many mountains that have plopped insipidly onto various platforms for 3 decades now. But this game knows what it is. It knows what it's supposed to be, and it knows how much that experience is worth. A few dollars for a game like this in my library that I'll pull out every month or two just when I want something kind of old school and arcadey to bash away at for half an hour. Something utterly devoid of pretentious garbage like some indie titles these days, too many of which I feel are trying just a bit too fucking hard to be art. This is a goddamn video game, and it is precisely as entertaining as a goddamn video game like this should be. It's pure, it's honest, it's an arcade game, no BS, no cutscenes, no fucking microtransactions, or DLC packs, or any kind of attempt to jam a clumsy story or narrative in there. It's just a few dollars worth of video game. Just a fun way to spend some time. That's what video games started out being. That's what they still can be. This game proves it. The only real issue I have with it is I have to boot the game manually by going to the folder where it is and selecting its executable from the directory, because whoever wrote the installer for the Steam game balked it up so bad Steam itself can't launch the game because it doesn't know where the executable is. Whoopsie-doozle! Someone should have probably checked that before they pulled the trigger on the release. But aside from that, go for it, I say. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty, and I will catch you next time.